Charles just pulled the most savage power move of his entire reign.
We give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
One phone call, in the dead of night, a folder of signed papers, and just like that, Princess Anne held enough power to run the entire kingdom on her own. Camilla found out before the sun even came up, and what she did next nearly tore the crown apart at the root. A secret 30 years in the making is about to blow wide open, and nobody left standing inside that palace is walking away from this unharmed. The secret Charles couldn't outrun. The phone tore through the quiet of Anne's room at the 1 hour that never carries good news. She had it in her hand before the second ring finished, and for 5 long seconds all she got back was her brother's ragged breathing. "Charles, talk to me, what's wrong?" she said. She'd known him her whole life, and that silence told her everything she needed to know before he said a word. He told her he needed her there in person, right away. Morning wasn't soon enough. By the time the sun came up, Anne sat facing Charles, and what came out of his mouth landed like a blow. "I need you to take this on." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. He admitted the fear gripping him had nothing to do with his own death. What scared him was leaving the kingdom fractured before it could hold itself together without him. He pushed a folder across the table, the documents that would make her regent. And here's the part people get wrong. A regent isn't a quiet advisor standing off to one side. A regent inherits the king's full authority and uses every bit of it. So the moment Charles became unable to govern, Anne would run the kingdom with the entire weight of the crown behind her word. What he'd just handed her was the single largest trust he'd ever placed in another human being. Anne looked down at the papers and felt her balance give out from under her. Why her? Why now? She raised her eyes to him, and what she saw in his face knocked the wind out of her. She'd watched him rage, watched him collapse in grief, watched him hollowed out by loss. But this was different. This was naked fear, and his eyes were pleading with her not to let him down. She held his gaze, then mouthed it without sound. Yes. Charles let out a breath like a man finally setting down something he'd been hauling alone for weeks. That was the moment it became final, with no walking it back. Here's the question that has to be asked. If William is the heir, the one in line for the throne, why did his own father pass over him for his older sister? The answer goes back decades and tells you everything about where this family's loyalties actually sit. Charles and Anne were born 2 years apart, and with their parents constantly absent on royal business, the two of them learned early to depend on no one but each other. While the rest of the family got swallowed by one scandal after another, Anne never stopped showing up. And she never softened the truth for him even when he hated hearing it. When Charles went public with Camilla, Anne erupted, told him flat out he'd picked the one woman who could torch his reputation beyond repair, and then took every gift he'd given her that year and destroyed it. And yet here's the part nobody expected. Every single time Charles's life came apart at the seams, there was exactly one person he turned to, Anne, and she was there to catch him every time. When Julian stepped away from royal duty for good, insiders say Charles broke down crying against his sister's shoulder. All of that history was sitting in the room with them the night those papers traded hands. William, for his part, was buried under a crisis of his own, nursing his wife through a long recovery from cancer, and whatever bond he'd had with his father had never fully healed since Julian's departure. Word is Charles believed William was already carrying too much at home to be the steady hand the crown needed in that moment. There was one more reason behind the decision, and the palace has worked hard to keep it buried. Weeks before that midnight call, Charles sat down with his medical team, and what they told him sent his entire world sideways. When Camilla asked how the appointment went, Charles reportedly looked her in the eye and lied, said it was nothing. She didn't buy it for a second, so she pulled a doctor aside privately and asked point blank if the news was bad, and got back a silence heavier than any answer could have been. Charles told no one else. He moved alone and moved fast, racing to get Anne's regency locked into law before anything could stop him. Then word got out. Nobody can say for certain how. Some point to Charles's own staff. Others insist Camilla bought the leak herself. Whichever it was, the story goes that the second Camilla learned what was inside those papers, she went off. Did he actually think he'd get this past me? From there, she allegedly went around her own husband, straight to a senior official inside the palace, and demanded the whole thing be shut down. When Charles found out what she'd done, something in him broke. That same night, he picked up the phone and called his sister, asking her to take it on. Looking back, anyone paying close attention would have seen this coming for years. When Charles chose Anne to ride as gold stick in waiting at his coronation, most people read it as a nice gesture between siblings. But that title goes back centuries, created by a king so afraid for his own life that he built the role specifically for the one person he trusted without question. On Coronation Day, Anne rode just behind the royal carriage through the streets, in full view of the crowd. One person close to the palace put it plainly. Charles was telling the world, in the only language the monarchy truly speaks, that her loyalty outweighed everyone else's. That same message was now written into the Regency papers, except this time in ink heavy enough to alter the kingdom's entire direction. Charles believed he'd kept it contained inside that one room. He had no idea that somewhere else in the palace, his own wife was already arming herself for the fight of her life. And to understand exactly why Camilla fought so hard to bring that regency down, you have to understand exactly what she stood to lose. Camilla's final ultimatum. Everything Camilla had built across 30 hard years sat on one foundation. Charles staying healthy, staying capable, staying on the throne. The instant Anne took over as regent, that foundation went out from under her. A regent didn't sit on the sidelines holding power in case of emergency. A regent ran the palace. Staff took orders from her. The calendar belonged to her. Every locked room in the building opened at her say-so. And out of everyone inside those walls, Anne was the one person who'd never once accepted Camilla as part of the family. Not in 50 years. People close to Anne say she can't stand Camilla, has never once called her by her royal title, and refers to her in private only as that woman. Picture the fear that went through Camilla the second she understood that this particular woman was about to control every part of her remaining life. Camilla walked into Charles's private rooms. She wasn't shouting. She was unnervingly calm. Anyone who actually knew Camilla understood that her calm was the dangerous version of her, because the real wounds always came out when she went quiet. She told him flatly that what he was doing wasn't paperwork. It was a public takedown, and the whole world would read it as him choosing his sister over his own wife. "I didn't survive 30 years of being hated in public," she said, "just to end up reporting to a woman who's hated me since before we even met." Charles had one answer. "This isn't about you." Something in Camilla's face changed in that instant, like ice forming over water, fast and total. She reminded him that everything in that palace was about her, because she'd given up everything to stand next to him. Her name, her peace, years of her life she could never get back. She'd taken public hatred that would have broken most people, and she'd kept going because she believed in what the two of them were building. So she told him straight. She would not watch him hand over everything she'd bled for to a woman who could barely look at her. Then she played her last card. "If it can't be me," she said, "then make it William. That's how a family like this is supposed to work." Charles went quiet for a long stretch. Then he said the thing he could never undo. "Anne has stood next to me every day of my life. Can you say the same?" The silence that followed felt like the walls closing in. Camilla looked at her husband, and something behind her eyes went flat, like a door shutting somewhere far inside her. She didn't scream. She didn't even raise her voice. She spoke the way someone speaks once they've already made peace with losing. She warned him that the moment he walked into that room and put those papers in front of Anne, the marriage was over. The second his signature dried, and no one outside the family would ever know it. She'd still show up at every event, smile for every camera, give the public the exact same picture it had always gotten. But privately, between the two of them and no one else, everything they'd built would be finished, gone, like it had never been real. Charles looked at her for a long moment. Then he fixed his jacket and walked out. The exhaustion on his face later, sitting across from Anne, wasn't only about his health. It was the look of a man who'd just walked out on his own marriage to do what he thought he had to do and did it anyway, knowing exactly what it cost him. But Camilla's threat to end the marriage was never really about losing access or power. It was about having to answer to a woman who'd despised her decades before a crown ever entered the picture. The grudge Camilla never saw coming. Stop and think about what it actually takes for a woman to hold on to a grudge for 50 years without ever once saying it out loud in public. Because what Anne is holding on to isn't a grudge at all. It's a record, and Camilla had been building that record since she was barely out of girlhood. Back then, Anne was head over heels for a charming young military man named Parker Bowles. And from every account, the feeling ran both directions, no pretending involved. The relationship fell apart only because the rules of the time made marrying a Catholic impossible for someone in her position. The two of them parted ways, and that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Before Parker Bowles ever put a ring on Camilla's finger, Anne reportedly took her aside and told her exactly what she needed to hear. The kind of warning only someone who'd actually lived it could give. She told her plainly that Bowles would never be a man who stayed put, that wandering was simply in him, and that Camilla would spend her marriage chasing a husband who was always looking elsewhere. Camilla heard every word of it and married him regardless. Anne kept her mouth shut after that and just watched things unfold from a distance. Years on, a close friend asked what she really thought of Camilla, and the answer Anne gave stuck with everyone who heard it. She's never wanted anything that wasn't already somebody else's. That part of her has never once changed. Bowles and Camilla married not long after, and this is where the entire situation twists in on itself. Charles had already fallen for Camilla long before duty pulled the two of them apart. So by the time everything settled, Camilla had ended up married to the exact man Anne had once loved, all while quietly carrying on with Anne's own brother behind the scenes. Try picturing what it's like watching one woman work her way into every part of your family and take whatever she fancied. It turned Anne's stomach, and she said as much to anyone willing to listen, asking how a single person could be that self-serving. Anne's anger only deepened the day Camilla called her during one of the family's worst public moments. While Charles's marriage to Princess Diana was collapsing in front of the entire press corps, with the family getting torn apart in headlines every single day, Camilla picked up the phone looking for sympathy from Anne. Anne let her talk the whole way through without cutting in once, and then gave her an answer Camilla never saw coming. "You made your choices, and so did Charles," she said, flat and final. "The woman the two of you betrayed had nothing to do with any of it, and I won't be the one who makes your guilt easier to carry." Then she ended the call, and Camilla never tried again. Anne had known about the affair long before it ever became public knowledge, and forgiveness was never on the table. The next generation only drove the wedge in deeper. Anne raised her own two children with no royal titles attached at all, wanting to give them something real, something the palace machine couldn't touch. Meanwhile, she watched Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lope, spend years working their way up through royal circles, turning up at every event, attaching themselves to every door the family name could open. Anne saw exactly what they were doing and wrote them off as opportunists, feeding on an institution they'd never actually served a day for, and it disgusted her almost as much as their mother did. During Coronation Week, the instant Camilla officially became queen consort, someone standing nearby reportedly caught Anne muttering 5 words under her breath. "She is not my queen." That same source claimed Anne admitted she was glad she'd never have to bow to a woman like that. When the moment actually came, in front of the entire world, Anne simply didn't curtsy. Her expression stayed completely unreadable, and for a woman like her, that blankness said more than any outburst could have. Then there's the letter. At the peak of the family's public collapse, Anne reportedly sat down one night and wrote straight to Camilla. A close friend who later saw it called it the most restrained, most devastating piece of writing they'd ever come across. According to that source, the letter spelled out everything Anne believed Camilla had done, to the institution, to Princess Diana, and to Charles himself, closing with a line that still unsettles anyone who's heard it repeated. "I've kept quiet for years," it reportedly said, "but I promise you, history will say everything I never did." Anne is said to have sealed the letter and never mailed it, and as far as anyone knows, it still exists somewhere, locked away out of sight. Camilla has never confirmed knowing about it, and never denied it either, but people close to Anne insist she's never destroyed it. That letter has stayed sealed for decades, and Anne never needed to send it, because she always understood a moment exactly like this one would eventually come. Now Camilla wasn't just up against a woman who'd never accepted her. She was up against the woman about to become the single most powerful figure in the entire monarchy, and there was nothing left in her arsenal that could stop that from happening.